Welcome, everyone. If you're looking for a session to dive into expense management, then you're in the right place. Let's take a look at how we will spend the next half hour exploring expense management within finance and supply chain management. We'll start off our session with presenter introductions, an introduction into expense management. Following introductions, we will demo expense management within the web client. Then we will be demoing expense reporting within the mobile application. If you have any questions throughout our presentation of this topic, please put them in the chat as we'll be monitoring it throughout the session. My name is Mike Mathews. I'm the supply chain consulting lead for Stoneridge Software. I've been in the dynamic space for over 8 years, primarily focused on implementation of advanced warehouse practices and both process and discrete manufacturing. I currently hold multiple Microsoft certifications focused around general ERP areas and expert level supply chain and manufacturing topics.
And my name is Emily Stockton. I'm a finance and supply chain management consultant here at Stoneridge Software. With over 2 years of experience in implementing various modules, my experience lies primarily on the finance side of things, but as of late, I've also started to enter the supply chain world. I also hold a few different Microsoft certifications, and prior to a career in D365 consulting, I had the opportunity to work in the transportation industry. During my time there, I had the opportunity to work in various roles, and so I was able to gain valuable experience in operations, sales, fleet management, and even business development. And so now that you know who we are and a little bit about our backgrounds, let's go ahead and get started. So before we look at the functionality today, we wanted to briefly take a look at the expense report lifecycle. And the reason we wanted to do that is because the lifecycle at a high level doesn't change much from business to business. However, each individual step may look a little bit different depending on you or your organization's requirements, business processes, you name it. And so when we kick off the life cycle, it's always going to start with a purchase. We always have to start with an expense. The next step is going to be creating an expense report so we can report on the expense. While you're working on your expense report, it's really imperative to make sure that you're complying with your defined organizational policies, whether that is attaching a receipt for a particular transaction. Maybe if you purchase a business class airline ticket, you need to require a justification reason. Whatever that may look like, you want to make sure that you're being compliant. After everything looks good to go, the next step is going to be to submit the report. Upon report submission, what we normally see is some kind of approval workflow. Again, this is where one of those steps may look very different from business to business, but overall the idea is pretty consistent. Once the report has been approved and everything looks good to go, it's time to make sure that those transactions have been added to our books and have been documented somewhere, whether that's posting it to your expense subledger or maybe you post directly to your GL. We want to make sure that step 6 is not forgotten. And so again, we wanted to talk about this because for the most part, the life cycle looks similar across the board until you take a little bit of a deeper dive and things look a little bit different depending on your needs. And so what D365 does is they allow you multiple options to make sure that this functionality can be curated to you and your organization's needs. And that's exactly what we're going to look at today.
Thanks, Emily. What we're going to look at today is going to highlight some of the key functions that FNSCM's expense management can provide. Simple expense reporting creation and submission abilities, customizable approval workflows that allow organizations to really maintain traceability and ensure accurate expense report submissions. Lastly, we will review policy compliance configurations that limit the amount of work identified for report approvers to ensure that each expense meets the identified criteria based on expense category and applicable policies. First, we're going to start off with a demo of expense management within FNSCM's web client. Now that I'm sharing my screen, we'll start to dive into the expense management workspace. One of the important things to note is that there are 2 ways that you can create an expense report within FNSCM's web client. The first way is through the module, and the second way is through the workspace. For the intent of this session, we're going to be working primarily in the workspace to show you how the expense management workspace operates. I'm going to select the expense management workspace and it will launch. Once this launches, one of the important things to know is if we look up at the top left-hand corner, we're going to see expense management with my name, Michael Mathews, underneath it. Expense management does allow for the ability to delegate the creation of expense profiles or expense reports for other individuals across multiple legal entities. So if I wanted to select the dropdown and potentially identify or create an expense report for one of my delegates, I could come in here and then select a different record. For now, I'm going to create it underneath my user. So what are we looking at currently? If we notice that the form is currently on the reports tab at the top, we can see that I have one report within the expense management module. There are 5 main tabs that we use within the expense management module. That is reports, which shows your expense reports that have been created or gives you the ability to create a new expense report. Receipts, which is the area where you can go and upload your receipts or view the receipts that have already been created. Expenses, which is where you're going to create the majority of your expenses that you would like to add to new reports or to existing reports. And then there are 2 analytic tabs as well. So admin analytics and personal analytics, which we will not be covering today. To start off, I'm going to start with the receipts section. So if we go into the receipts tab, we can see that we have a few different tiles that are already created. As you create receipts within the expense management module, it will create a tile for each receipt. You have the ability to select the open tab or open option on the tile itself, and that will automatically download the receipt that has been uploaded. From here, you can select one or multiple receipts, and you have the ability to attach them to an existing report or move them to a new expense management report. You also have the ability to add new receipts. So if you would like to add a new receipt, you'll click Add Receipts. You'll have a pop-open window on the right. From here, you'll select Browse, and you can select a receipt that you would like to upload. From here, you have the ability to add different notes. So maybe you would like to make note of who attended or what the reason for this expense would be. You also have the ability to modify the name of the receipt. So in this scenario, I'm going to make it Client Connect Lunch. From here, you can select Upload. You get a blue action pane at the top saying that your upload has been complete, and you can select OK. From here, the form will refresh, and you'll be able to see that we now have a expense or a receipt that is created for a Client Connect Lunch. If we want to go to the next tab to go through expenses, the expense form is very similar. We have the ability to multi-select or single select different expenses to add them to an existing or a new expense report. We also have the ability to edit expenses. So if we had one expense that we needed to change or update records on, we would simply select it and then click the edit button. From here, you have the ability to change your category, amount, date that the expense occurred, merchant, or add any additional information that would need to be provided. Once you've made your edits, you would simply select Close, and then you can continue to create new expenses or edit other expenses. In order to create a new expense, you would click New Expense, and it's going to run you through the steps of populating all the different categories. In this scenario, I'm going to create a new meal expense, enter the amount, identify the date that this expense occurred, confirm the payment type. There are multiple options that you can configure for payment type or payment method. In this scenario, I am going to leave it to credit card. We can identify our merchant. So this would allow us to identify the vendor or merchant that we purchased this meal from or essentially incurred the expense with. You can also add additional information here. So in this scenario, I'm just going to put meal with Emily. Once you have entered everything for this expense, you have 2 options at the bottom. You can either save this expense and it will exit the pane on the right and essentially create the new expense, or you have the ability to click Save in New, which will open up a new expense so you can continue to flawlessly create those new expenses. That just eliminates the need to essentially go back and click New Expense each time that you want to create a new one, and it makes your expense reporting process or building out of that expense report much faster. In this scenario, I'm only going to create one expense, so we'll just click Save. All right, we can see that we now have our expense created. And if there's any other information that we want to add or change, we can again go back in and edit it. But from here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add these expenses to an existing report. So I'll select my 2 expenses that I want to use. In this scenario, I'm going to use my hotel expense and this meal expense. And I will select Attach to Existing Report. Once I select that option, it's going to come up with a side pane on the right again, and it's going to have a drop-down that's filtered down to all of my expense reports that are in a current draft status. So those are going to be all the expense reports that are currently able to take new expenses on before submitting to workflow. So in here, I'm going to select my March expense report and then select OK. Once it processes and adds that expense to this report, it's actually going to show my March expense report or the report that I added that expense to. From here, I'll get a high-level overview of the amount to be paid by this report, the total number of receipts that are attached, the status, and I'll be able to click through all the different expenses that are added within this report to see an overview on the right-hand side. Now, this gives me the ability to identify things such as project ID, whether the expense is billable or not, the activity number, any internal notes that might be applicable, and again, be able to edit those additional information. So in here, I might want to add some project information to the hotel charge. So I would go in, you can default whether it's billable or not based on the project ID, and then you can also identify the activity number for this applicable expense. From here, if you are at a point where you've built out your full expense report and there's no other changes you need to make, you can notice up at the top that you have the ability to add new expenses if you forgot one, or maybe unattach an expense that is not ready to submit yet, whether you don't have the receipt or you're maybe missing a project to be able to bill to. You would be able to select the record and then click unattach expenses. From here, you would be able to go through, you would actually be able to remove the expenses. If you don't need to create a new expense, you would come here and click unattached expenses, and that would give you the ability to add in new expenses that have already been created but are not attached to this report. If you want to remove an expense, you would click the remove button, and that would remove the selected expense. If you want to see any of the receipts that are attached into the expense report, you would click the receipts tab, and then that would show any of the receipts that have been added to this applicable expense report. From here, you can actually select the receipt and it'll show you a high-level overview of it over on the right. You'll be able to see the date that the expense occurred, the amount, and all the merchant. From here, you can also see a picture of what the receipt looks like to confirm that it is correct. So once you've built out this expense report, you'll be able to either save and close if you want to wait for a different day or any other expenses to come in to submit it, or you'll be able to submit it here. As you go to submit it to the workflow, you'll be able to add any applicable comments that might help the approver with understanding the nature of these expenses or any information that might be needed during the process of the approval. Once you've added all your comments, you can click submit. And in this scenario, we noticed that we got a policy error at the very top. So this is where expense management in FNSCM really excels. So we're able to create different policies to ensure that all the criteria for our expenses is met correctly. So if we want to click through some of our expenses, we'll be able to see that there is one that has a policy error. So if we click on this one, we'll be able to see our policy and notice the red X circle that's also indicating that there's something wrong with this applicable expense. We'll be able to see that the meal-related expenses require a receipt. So in here, we're actually able to click the receipt section and go into an edit mode. And then from here, it will filter down the receipts that already exist that are not attached to another one. In this scenario, if we click add receipt, we can select existing to select some of the ones that we've already imported, or we can click new and pick one from our desktop. From here, I'm just going to click one of our other ones. So let's use the Lunch Connect, and we'll select add. And then if there are multiple receipts, you can add multiple at this point, or remove if you selected the incorrect one. And then once you're done selecting your receipts to upload, you would click close. From there, it will link it and it will show you the receipts with the title at which it is added with. And then you'll be able to see that our red X has now become a green check mark. So we know that we're ready to submit. We go through the submit process again, adding any comment notes that we would need there, and then select submit. Perfect. So we didn't get any red error message, and we've been placed back into our expenses form. If we wanted to go into the reports to see all of our expense reports, we can now see that our March expense report is now in review status pending approval through the workflow. If there's been any changes that need to be made for this, or it gets rejected by the approver, we'll see that this status will update. We also have the ability to go in and recall this if there's any changes we need to make before the approver runs through the review process. So that concludes the example and walkthrough of expense management within Finance in Supply Chain Management web client. So let's trade back to our slide deck.
All right. Well, thank you, Mike. Now that we have gotten the chance to look at what D365 has to offer in the web browser, I wanted to also show you kind of another piece of really cool functionality, and that is reporting on the go with the expense management mobile app. So what Microsoft has done is they have created a power app for us to use in which you can capture receipts, you can add new expenses, you can create and submit an expense report, and you can even track the approval status of your expense reports all on your mobile device. And so whether you travel for work or maybe you're a working parent who just needs to submit their expense report while you're at soccer practice, this is something that can make expense reporting incredibly convenient. And so we wanted to make sure that we spent some time on that today. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to steal the screen with my cell phone, and I am going to just kind of show you the lay of the land. So if you will bear with me just 1 second to kick this off. So as you can see, the app looks pretty similar to what we saw in the web browser. And what I mean by that is you can see we have 4 tabs at the bottom of our screen. We've got receipts, expenses, reports, and approvals. And so let's start with receipts. An exact same idea that Mike just showed us. You were able to add a receipt from here. And what this is going to do is if I click this plus sign, it's going to prompt me to open the camera on my cell phone. But what I want to do today is rather than adding an unattached receipt, I want to come over to the expenses tab and create a new unattached expense. And so I'm going to click the plus sign here. And now I'm going to capture a photo of my receipt. It's not my best photography, but it'll do for today. I'll click done. And now our receipt has been created successfully. And so really similar to what we saw in the web browser, what this is going to do is it's going to walk you through each individual field that we now need to populate. And so I'm going to start with an expense category, and I'm going to choose meals. I'm going to input our transaction amount of $19.87. Ooh, not 1,000. That would be a really, really luxurious meal. I'm going to leave the transaction date as today. And then if I want to input a merchant, I can. In this case, our organization doesn't require it, so I'm going to go ahead and leave it blank for time purposes. Now that I've added everything that I wanted to add, I'm going to go ahead and click done. And then what this is going to do is, again, we're just creating an unattached receipt or unattached expense, excuse me. And all that means is it's not attached to an expense report yet. And so let's say now that this exists, it's time for me to go ahead and create a new expense report. And so same idea, we're going to click the button. I'm going to give this report a name. And so I'm just going to say March expenses. And then for description, I'm just going to say expenses for the month of March. Got really creative there, as you can tell. And now I'm going to click Attach Expenses. And this is where we're going to add that unattached expense that we just created. Now, if there was a scenario where you have multiple here, you also have this Select All option at the very top. So if you don't want to have to click through like 15 or 20 different expenses, you do have the option to select them all and then maybe just remove a few, depending on what you're needing. I'm going to click Done again. And this is going to pull the expense onto our expense report. And so you can see now below that description field where it reads attached expenses and then it has 1 in your parentheses, that's going to indicate that we now have 1 expense attached to this report. And so at the bottom, you've got 2 options. You can either save this as a draft or you can go ahead and submit it to workflow. For today's purposes, I'm going to go ahead and click Save Draft because I wanted to show you kind of what this looks like as far as tracking the status of your reports in the app. And so we're still on this reports tab, but you can see in the top where draft is in blue. And what this is going to indicate is that our expense report is still in draft status. We have not yet submitted it to workflow. If we moved over to in review, we would see all of our expense reports that are currently in the approval workflow and working their way through the process. We clicked approved. This is going to show me all of my personal expense reports that have already been approved. Chances are they've been processed for payment. All that good stuff. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to come back to our draft tab. I'm going to click on our report and I'm going to go ahead and submit it so we can see it work its way through. So I'm going to click submit at the bottom of the screen. And as you can see, our report has submitted successfully. You'll also see that under our draft subsection here, we no longer see that expense report. However, if we came over to our in review subsection, we now are going to see that report. And so what we haven't talked about yet is this approvals tab at the very bottom right hand of our screen. And so what this is going to do is if you yourself are an expense report approver, you also have the ability to review and approve or reject reports within the mobile app. And so right now I just submitted the report, so it may take it a little bit of time to come through workflow. But I do have it configured to actually come back to me for approval. And so what we'll do, or what we would expect to see, is we're going to expect to see the report that I just submitted come through on this tab for approver review. Typically, this is not something that you see with business requirements, people, self-approving. But for today's purposes, we went ahead and set it up that way. I'll refresh this one more time. There we go. And so as you can see, my expense report has now come through. And so as the approver, I can click on this. And what this is going to do is it's going to allow me to view everything. I'm going to be able to view the attached expenses. I could click on the attachments and review all of the receipts that were connected to this. I can even look at the timeline to get details on the workflow itself. And so this screen tells me that it's been assigned to both myself and Mike. So either one of us could take action on this report. And so the really great thing as the expense approver, and Mike mentioned this earlier, is the policies within D365's functionality. And what I mean by that is when a user goes to submit their expense report, the system actually kind of does like a validation to make sure that all policies are being withheld, that your expense report is policy compliant for every configured and applicable policy. So as the approver, I don't have to worry about, well, I didn't submit a receipt for this, or they didn't submit a receipt for this, I need to reject it. The system is going to do that work for me. And so what I'm going to do now is at the bottom of my screen, I'm going to go ahead and click approve. If I want to leave a comment, I can. If I want to leave a justification, I can. But for today, I'm just going to go ahead and click approve one more time. And this again is just going to approve our expense report, and we are going to work our way through the rest of this workflow as configured. And so as you can see, we've got this notification now that it's been approved. I no longer have anything on this approvals tab as the approver here, but if I were as the submitter to come back to my reports tab and move over to my approved subsection, I am now going to see that March expenses expense report that we just looked at. So that is all I had for our app demo today. To wrap all this up, we were able to see a lot of really great stuff today. First, we were able to see how simple it is to create and submit expense reports in both the web browser and the mobile application within FNSEM's expense management module. We also got to see how policies look while they're in action. Once you have those configured, you're not able to even get your expense report into workflow without making sure that you are compliant with your organization's policies first. After that, we took a look at the workflows where you could see that approval status in the web browser, which Mike showed us. And then we also in the mobile app could see from an approver standpoint that I am able to take action on others' expense reports, but I can also keep track of the approval status of my own expense reports on the go. And then last but not least, the mobile app, again, can just be really, really convenient if you have other things going on and maybe you're not always able to be right in front of your computer. It's just a really, really great tool that is just, it's got a lot of great functionality. And so with all of this being said, what we've been able to show you today is just a small part of what finance and supply chain management's expense management functionality has to offer. And so if this is something that you think would be of interest to you or maybe your team, I'd highly encourage you to just reach out. If you have any questions, we're happy to assist. And even if it's something that maybe we don't know the answer to, we're happy to get you in touch with the appropriate person who does.
Well, so that concludes today's session on expense management within Dynamics Finance and Supply Chain Management. Thank you all for joining us today, and we hope to hear from you soon.